I wanted to ask you a question about this crash, this concussion going on between the White House and the intelligence community. And it began with the briefings that presidents elect have often received before the swearing in from the agency, which President Trump wasn't interested in. Is this a relationship that is doomed, or is it going to come back and where the agency can really make some helpful support to the presidency?
And before you answer, for purposes of our online audience, the person who's just asked the question is Fred Hitz, a former Inspector General of the CIA.
A not disinterested observer. Okay. It's a troubled relationship right now. There's no doubt about that. Where the trouble began, I think, is probably open to interpretation, and I think it probably began before the briefings during the transition. I think it goes back to the campaign. And it's evolved to a point where I think there's a suspicion within parts of the Trump administration that there's a kind of an intelligence cabal trying to undermine the Trump presidency. So that's not a good situation. I think it'll probably right itself for a couple of reasons. I think in the end, people who are in the intelligence community, you know far better than I, obviously, but I think they're basically patriots who try to do their job for whoever is president in the end. That's the view of most people. That's what they set out to do. And because I think the White House will realize, I'm sure it does now, but it'll become more apparent that it needs the intelligence community badly. I mean, there are things the intelligence community does for every president that nobody else can do, and the kind of the mutual the mutual need that the two institutions, the White House and the intelligence community, have for each other will prevail in the long run. I think that there's a period right now, and this is not just true in the intelligence community, it's true across the government, in which there's a literal transition underway, and there are very few Trump people atop a very big federal bureaucracy that has lots of people who are either still Obama hangovers or are just career professionals, and there's a mistrust of those other people because they're not our people. Mike Pompeo's at the CIA. I think he's a very impressive, intelligent, and capable guy who will win the trust of the agency, but these are early days, and I think the suspicion, because let's face it, anybody who watched Donald Trump's inaugural address heard him come in and basically attack the establishment of Washington and of both parties directly from the west front of the Capitol in a way that nobody's ever, my lifetime, has ever done in an inaugural address. He basically said, I don't trust any of you people. And so that was kind of the starting point. We'll work our way back from that, I think, and we're still working our way back from that phase. So I think it's bad now, but I suspect the trend line is probably moving in a positive direction.
I am curious, given the length of time that people take with tweets. I do not tweet, I have never tweeted, I don't ever intend to tweet, but it seems to me that the people who are interested in reading long articles and the people who are hoping that the facts will actually lead to the truth are not willing to take the time either to discover the facts because they don't think you're on to the next thing before you have a chance. And it's really scary to me how people just don't take the time either to listen or to read or even to think. Thank you for
I think that is a profound comment, and I share the concern. I mean, I do tweet because I have to. It's a way of distributing our stories, my columns. But I am somewhere between amazed and extraordinarily frustrated at the number of people who it's clear don't read anything except the 140 characters. They don't read the underlying article. They don't link on it. They're commenting on the 140-character tweet that's supposed to just point them there. It's just obvious when you read the reaction you get sometimes that nobody's bothered to actually read what you're pointing to. And that for me that's frustrating because I put a lot of time into those words. You'd hope that you'd read them, but that's trivial compared to the broader reality, which is that people need to stop and gather information before deciding what their opinion is. And you'd like to think that's a natural process, and I think it's being short-circuited. Again, trying to be an optimist here, I think that, and I see this with young people, and obviously there are some really smart students here, I think the temptation in the media environment they've grown up in is to just rush past everything to the conclusion, but I think people are learning that it's better to pause, gather some facts, then decide what you think. And I think, in the end, I think that common sense approach prevails. But right now, I think we're in a transition phase in which I think social media in particular, but kind of the media landscape in general, has made that not as obvious as it ought to be.
This is a very old-fashioned kind of response to that, but does that speak to the need for teaching citizenship? I mean, that's sort of passé.
I think there, my wife has made this point for a while, and I think she's right, that people ought to be taught civics again. How does a democracy work? What are the institutions of democracy? I don't think that happens anymore. Yeah. I got it in 8th grade, right? You probably got it in 8th grade. I don't know if anybody does anymore in 8th grade, but I think it's a reasonable thing, because the lack of understanding of how democracy is supposed to work is a pretty widespread issue, I would say.
Let me ask you a question that came in from a Facebook viewer asking that how does the media account for, but basically this reality that repeating false statements amplifies them, even if you label them as a falsehood, and that's a bigger issue than whether or not you call it a lie. And I guess it boils down to, is there a point at which media should simply not repeat things that were false?
This is a kind of a classic dilemma. I'm just chuckling because there used to be a columnist in Washington, and people would accuse him of saying, there's some really dastardly salacious rumors circulating in town. Let me tell you a few of them. But I don't, it's a really good question. I don't have a good answer to it. I don't know what the right answer is. I think you can't ignore, particularly when a president says something, as I said before, it is in and of itself newsworthy, and I don't think you can ignore it. I think your job is to put it in context and to explain. I think you can't also put your head in the sand and think that if the mainstream media doesn't do that somehow we'll keep it bottled up, because there's no other way for it to get out. Well, I think we've learned that that's not the way this media environment works. So I think there is a real danger. Things become urban myths because they're repeated often enough. I think that danger is less than the danger of not fully sort of airing out everything that's being debated in a democracy. So I acknowledge the problem, but I think it's a lesser problem than the alternatives would be.
It does speak to, and we'll take another question in just a sec, but it makes me think about that. I thought one of the more interesting things that's happened since the inauguration was when Kellyanne Conway, the close advisor to the president, was in fact dropped from CNN, at least for a period of time. And CNN already maybe does more than anybody of these essentially contractual relationships with news figures to also be commenting. They're labeled as that, though I think it's confusing to viewers. But then you had this series of things that Kellyanne Conway said that were clearly false or strange even, and so they dropped her and said she's not a credible voice anymore. I thought that was actually a pretty notable reaction.
Well, look, I mean, this is there's a theme here that I keep coming back to, which is that think about these things in the long run. In the long run, all that I have as a journalist, all that somebody who's a public official really has is credibility. And if you undermine your credibility, you've lost. And so I think everybody in the long run recognizes that that's true, and I think that's a big break on the kind of false news phenomenon, or in whatever form you want to say it takes. But Kellyanne Conway is a smart person. I've known her for a long time. She recognizes that her credibility is important. I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for a long time. I know the only thing I've got is credibility. And I think everybody needs to recognize that false news does not win in the long run because it's not credible and will be recognized as incredible, literally. Does that make it easier in the moment in which that sort of thing seems to be taking hold? No, but I think you have to have a little confidence in the basic goodness of human nature.
This is a media question, but it is having to do with the State Department, which I feel like has been gutted out somewhat, and I don't want to get into that. But my issue is about Rex Tillerson not taking press with him on his trip, and the pros and cons of that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question, and we were not happy with that. I think it broke precedent. Going back to Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State goes on an important international trip. And by the way, what she's referring to is Rex Tillerson going to South Korea, Japan, and China, which not much happening in that part of the world right now, right? And not taking journalists along. I think it's a very bad precedent. I think it's unhelpful to Americans. Frankly, I think it's unhelpful to the State Department. In the end, I don't think if you're Rex Tillerson and you want to make a point in China that you want to be reliant on local reporters to convey your point accurately. And so I think it's not in, look, again, don't worry about doing us favors in the press. We'll do our job as best we can no matter what. Is it in the best interest of American society to do that? And I think it's a bad precedent. We've protested it. Look, we're the Wall Street Journal. We have certain advantages that other people don't have. We happen to have reporters and bureaus in Japan and South Korea and China. So we'll cover Rex Tillerson. We have dozens, literally, of reporters in those places. Not everybody does, and I think it's a mistake. I'm glad you raised it. I was very troubled by it. And we've protested it. Other news organizations have as well. I hope it's a one-off.
I understand that West Germany is talking about introducing legal sanctions on the distribution of fake news. Do you think that would be a useful initiative, or do you think that would be incredibly counterproductive?
It's a terrible idea, in my opinion. I mean, I don't think that's how you... Who gets to decide what's fake news and what the penalty is for distributing it? I mean, that would be a government entity. All of a sudden no, count me out at that point. Look, I believe that truth prevails, even on the internet and even in this environment, and you got to have a little confidence in that. Now, does that mean that Facebook shouldn't feel some obligation to keep that stuff off my Facebook homepage when I log on? Yeah, I think they should, because they're using it to make money. But that's a commercial transaction between me and Facebook, or the fake news purveyors in Facebook. That's not a government function. I don't want the government in any way determining what's real news and what's fake news. I want people to decide that, and institutions to decide that, and I want Americans to decide that, and I have complete confidence that they will. So I understand the sentiment, but personally, I think it's a terrible idea.
Hi, my name is Fitz, and I'm a second-year UVA student in Professor Wyatt Andrews' news media course.
Great professor. He may even be here.
He was earlier. I think he had to go
earlier.
teach a
I
class,
talked to him
but
for a
we
while.
had about a dozen students here
Great
from
guy.
his class. Yeah.
You've discussed all the negative, all the downsides to the new media environment where politicians can reach millions instantly in a personal manner. Looking forward with some optimism, do you see future candidates using this, and does that excite you at all?
Look, it's good. It's a really good question. It doesn't. I don't think it's a bad thing that politicians can reach out directly to voters. I mean, that's the reality, and I think that if I were a politician, I'd want to do the same thing. I don't hold that against them. All I'm saying is, and by the way, they're all going to do it. They will all do it. I mean, I get emails, and I get on these email lists, and all kinds of politicians who don't know who I am, thinking I'm a voter, reaching out to me directly, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. I think it's pure democracy in that sense, and nobody should object. All I'm saying is that there is an additional function of being kind of an arbiter of the truth, and a skeptic, and a kind of somebody who's a referee in the debate of ideas between this candidate and that candidate. I mean, they'll both be reaching out to voters, and I think you want somebody in the middle whose job is to sort out the truth amidst the political claims, and that's what journalism is. And all I'm really saying is that that function isn't going to go away. It shouldn't go away, and we shouldn't let the fact that people can go over our heads or around us, pick whatever metaphor you want, to deter us from doing that, because in the end, you as a voter are going to hear outlandish claims from both sides in any given race, and you ought to get some help from somebody who's an objective observer in sorting them out. And that's what journalism is. And that's what journalism always has been, is what it always should be. And I just don't want people to lose sight of that or to diminish the importance of that.
My line on this has always been, for a long time, when our business started collapsing, the business model of our business began collapsing, and I would say, which of course predates the internet. The internal dialogue at newspapers about, oh my God, what's happening, began with television more than anything else. But I can remember saying to people before it was even the internet, but saying that, calling myself an apocalyptic optimist. And that's my thing, apocalyptic optimist. And the idea of that is that yes, there's this apocalypse coming, but I'm optimistic that on the other side of this moonscape, once we pass through it, that there'll be 1,000 flowers blooming. Now it turns out that a lot of these flowers that are blooming right now are poisonous. But I still am relatively optimistic.
I share the apocalyptic optimism. Look, we have more subscribers signing up online every day than we have ever had before. People are very hungry for actual information, and that's a plus. That's an upside. We got to stop worrying about how we deliver that information, whether it's on a printed piece of paper or on a computer screen or an iPad or on a phone, and just worry about conveying the information. I think the hunger for actual credible information is higher than it's ever been. That's not a problem. We just got to figure out how to get out in front of it a little bit better.
And a lot of people don't realize that the Wall Street Journal, with 2 million plus a day, or 2 million plus people are paying to get the Wall Street Journal every day, and which makes it by far the largest newspaper circulation in the country.
Right, and I think the apocalypse began when somehow everybody in our business got together one day and decided, hey, let's just give our stuff away online. That'd be a good business model.
Didn't work out.
You want to be a source of credible information. Have you ever considered trying to run a series from the Journal that would give the factual information with respect to the wild charges that are often made about Congress is going to pass a new medical benefits for the country, but they're protecting themselves. They have different set of benefits. Whether that's true or false, honest to God, I do not know the answer to that. The same thing is true of what they're paid, with the rules with respect to lobbying once they leave office and things like that. I don't mean really aggressive investigative journalism, but I do mean a really clear explanation of how the system works at that level, because I've heard so many charges with respect to the compensation, medical care, for example. I actually don't know what to believe, and I think I know where the answers are, but I do not know the answer.
It's a great idea. It's probably something we ought to do. I think the whatever cynicism there is about the media, there's a much higher level, or at least a higher level of cynicism about Congress and elected officials. And some of it's justified, but some of it I think is out of bounds and based on, as you're suggesting, I think correctly, based on kind of misunderstandings and wild-eyed conspiracy theories. Look, people in Congress are not underpaid, and that's not, but they're not getting rich by being in that. Nobody's getting rich by being in the House of Representatives, particularly since most of those people have to maintain 2 households, one in Washington, one back home. It's not a glorious job, and I think it's kind of often portrayed as such. And I think there's a fair amount that we could do on both sides of that question, and I think it's a really excellent one. Because I think what you're pointing out is correct, which is that a lot of people's attitudes about democratic institutions, and Congress is the one we're talking about, based on kind of what they think they heard somewhere once, and that's really not.
It may well have been true 25 years ago.
Yeah, it may have been, but it's in context. It may not be true, or it may be a lot less true than people think it is. Even if it's got a kernel of truth to it, most of these things have a kernel of truth. So it's a really excellent thought.
We've run up against the end of our Facebook Live window, and so I think we have to stop the questions there, though maybe some folks can catch you on the way out.
Absolutely.
And thank you again. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thanks.